Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Um, it's a real privilege to be able to speak to you members of the Royal Commonwealth Society here at the Commonwealth Club and members of the Kenya Society, and I'd like to just particularly thank uh, Patrick Orr, who's chair designate of the Kenya Society, for putting in the extra hours. Patrick, thank you very much, and your team. Um, I'd also just like to recognize Lord Valentine Cecil, who's not here tonight, but who is one of the sponsors of your good cheer when I've finished talking, because outside there will be um, there will be uh, some refreshments. Something's gone wrong here. Thank you. There we go. Um, and I'd also like to thank Ray Orr for helping to sponsor tonight with ourselves at Rhino Ark. Um, I think what I wanted to just say at the very beginning, before going into the details of this proposal, of this presentation, and in fact, my screen has Aberdares and Beyond, and then it says Conserving Kenya's Great Mountains. And for some reason, this screen is a little bit small. I hope it doesn't do some similar things to some of the presentations I'm making. But I just want to make a point at the beginning, which most of you here live in a temperate climate, as you experienced when you came in, um, uh, and we in Kenya, and many of you here are from Kenya. We live in a tropical climate, and we have to ask ourselves, um, what is the role of mountains within the whole state of existence of countries in the tropical zone, and only then, I hope, the evaluation of what this presentation does, it opens up a much more meaningful discussion on their value in economic terms, and therefore in poverty eradication, sustainable development, and of course, as our, our logo talks about, we are called Rhino Ark, and I think some people may still think that we are dedicated to rhino. We are, but we're dedicated uh, in 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 great energy to conserving the areas where wildlife can exist. And if you don't look after those areas, then all the money and effort that goes into and the United Kingdom is a tremendous example of that, uh, of conserving wildlife as part of our biodiversity. All that will be lost. So it's really important, I think, to take um, the reality of what do these mountains do in terms of precipitation and therefore water and therefore biodiversity and therefore incomes and all the things that flow downstream. I'm going to take you now on a little journey. That is not a very clear picture, but it shows Kenya, and it shows those dark areas are Kenya's principal water towers. What we call water towers, they're mountains. But and the public perception in the country now is that those mountains are essential for economic development. Unlike temperate zone countries where they're not necessarily so pivotal to what happens. And as you see there are 5 principal mountains. And the ones that we're going to focus upon are the Mount Kenya, the Aberdares, and the Mau Complex. But I just will give you there the sizes and values of these areas. And as you see, they are vast and important, and they have spillover impacts into the region, into Uganda, into the Lake Victoria Basin, and even though I haven't thrown up a slide on this, of course, Mount Kilimanjaro is also a border mountain, and is important too. Now, I want to take you through first to the Aberdares case, which, of course, has been the flagship for Rhino Ark. And as Alistair Aberdare said, we are known, and our record of achievement is established. Now, what was at stake when we? I see. Are we seeing the Deputy High Commissioner there? No, we're not. I thought we were. No. What was at stake in the Aberdares when in 1989 we started Rhino Ark? And we didn't really start it for those issues. What we focused on was number 5, because iconic animals attract passion and interest, and that is how we started Rhino Ark. And I'd like to recognize in the room here a trustee of Rhino Ark United Kingdom, Nico Cool, whose father, Ken Cool, started Rhino Ark. He was the first, what I have been since 2000. And if Ken was here, I'm sure he'd be nodding and saying, yes, we were looking after black rhino, and we had no idea, really, that all those were at stake because of the threats that the Aberdare Mountains faced at that time. Of course, water is central to everything that emerges from the Aberdares, and without water from all these water towers, the economy of the country would be in tatters. So we have an economic message which is coming, which I hope I will be able to explain, and it'll come through this talk. But these mountains are not just pretty places. They are very important as economic centers. And you may look at them, and number 5 had GFH after the black rhino and the bongo. Well, this is a giant forest hog. And the only places you find this and bongo in Africa, the eastern bongo and giant forest hog, not the smaller ones you get in Uganda, are in those mountains. So they represent biodiversity in a major way as well. And he's rather a fine-looking chap there. He's actually, I think, smiling at you. So before the fence, what was happening in the Aberdares? And I think Alistair was able to touch on the fact that what Rhino Ark has managed to achieve is for human development to live right alongside the most precious and pristine areas, and both remain in harmony. So even though you have a fence, and it sounds the wrong way to create harmony, it does create harmony. So before this situation, that is what was happening in the area. And again, we were focusing, I think when this initiative began, we were focusing on number 5 bullet point. The others were there, and they only expressed themselves when we started to build the fence. That was a typical example of what life was like for the communities that lived next to the wildlife. And I remember in the early days when I was there, we would have these. Oh, there's an elephant out, and it's in a village, and what do you do? How do you cope with this animal? And so it was a real for the people living near the Aberdares. They're not really interested in the fact that you want to go and see the animals. They're interested in what is going to come off their farms so that they can pay the school fees tomorrow morning. And that's the way they looked at the animals, right in the village sometimes. So how do we then mobilize public opinion to get behind the process of raising money for a fence? Because the government certainly didn't have the money, didn't have the motivation, didn't want to do it. So it had to be that the civil society had to initiate what we believed was essential. And bear in mind, we didn't realize what was at stake in the fullest sense of the word. So we created an event which is still world unique, called Rhino Charge, and it happens every year on the 1st of June, the first weekend of June. And we have one or two crazy guys in this room who drive crazy cars and raise a lot of money, and for them I say thank you very much. That's my son-in-law's car, and he cost me a lot of money because I have to support him, and he came first last year. But the event now raises $1 million in 10 hours of the event. And that is civil society getting behind the project. Now, when it began, it only raised $2,500. So you can see that there has been a groundswell of support which expresses itself through the support of giving to these individual cars. It's like, it's rather like the London Marathon, but all the money goes to Rhino Ark. And that is what we achieved between 1989 and August the 28th, 2009, so 20 years. We built a 400-kilometer fence in phases. And as we did it, and very early on, and certainly when I became deeply involved in the year 2000, suddenly the realization that we had to change our message from looking after wildlife to looking after the entire ecosystem impacted enormously on our thinking. And we did change the message, and we then talked about water and conserving the forests, and we did it with all sorts of methods, but we managed to mobilize not only media attention, but we said things which were to the point. We said that if you want to drink a glass of water tonight, then you must conserve the Aberdares. And these were in advertisements to spread the message. There you have a picture of this fence. It's very sturdy. That is a section which is made entirely out of plastic posts, so that we're not cutting down the trees that we're trying to protect. It's 7 feet above the ground and 3 feet below the ground, because some of the most aggressive animals are those that burrow below ground, and they are as destructive of a potato field as an elephant. So we had to invest heavily in going underground with 1 meter of tight lock wire to protect the farmers, and therefore we were basically making a promise to the farmers that if we can protect the environment inside with all its biodiversity, would they support the fence? Because wire is valuable, and it's about $20,000 a kilometer to build this fence. if that fence was not valuable, that wire would be gone overnight. It's quite useful in other ways. Now, I can tell you that after 20 years and 400 kilometers of fence and 100,000 posts, of which 1 in 5 are made out of plastic, we do not have theft of wire. And that is one of the most telling, I think, telling facts about the impact that RhinoArc's work has had on these vastly precious mountain ecosystems. If we didn't have teamwork between the communities that are growing the tea just over the fence, and if they're not telling us what's happening inside, and if they're not helping us on gathering intelligence, and if some of their patrols that we have now trained are not walking the fence, we would have a very critical situation. And there are other examples where there has been failure, where government imposed a fence without talking with the people and saying, listen, this is not going to work unless you buy in. So that was a really important step in changing the message on the ground. And the communities that we worked with have actually helped build the fence for no pay, because we said the deal is you're not going to get it free. You're going to have to work for this. And they did. And we now have surveillance communities as well. And every kilometer of fence that has been built, we always dropped off 2 people who had helped build it to maintain it. So now we have 100 people who are now maintaining this fence, employed from the communities. Again, that binds the whole relationship of a dividing line, which actually is not a dividing line, it's a harmonious line. So are we on track after 20 years? And how do we assess ourselves? And are we staying on track? And I just list there the times that RhinoArc has said we must see that we're doing the right thing scientifically, environmentally, and with the support of the communities that live along the fence and the national community and internationally. And there you have a list of the different assessments that we've had over the years. The last one is 2012, and it's quite a tome. I wouldn't advise you all to read it, but those of you, and I can see one in the 5th row, has read it, I know. But so it's not as if we are, we're just saying these things. These documents, with the support of the United Nations Environment Programme, funded by RhinoArc and UNEP, these documents are telling us that what we have done is on track. So what has been the impact, and what have those assessments told us? Well, the last one, which was done last year, in 2010 actually, but launched last year, those are some of the vignette results, impacts of the fact that there's now a fence, the fact that the communities know that they own the land on one side of the fence, and every Kenyan, nearly 40 million now, own the land on the other side of the fence. Now that was never the case before. It was a porous border and everything happened. It was a free-for-all. Charcoal, uncontrolled livestock, trees being cut down, terrible destruction. But we've had over 20% increase in forest cover in 5 years, a 54% decrease in open areas. In other words, those open areas where there was uncontrolled livestock grazing and other things, it's now regenerating. exotic, very interesting one, the number 3, the exotic plantations outside the fenced area have increased because the economic pressure that was bearing down on the forests has motivated people to grow their own woodlots. And then what has happened to land values? It's gone up 300%. So their asset base, those farmers' asset base, has had a massive jump. Those are just some of the impacts. Specifically to the fence-edge communities, a lot of things have happened, and that's how we keep our bargain with them. Elephants are no longer destroying their crops. It was very difficult to get people to work on the farms very close to the forest edge because of danger. Elephant would come out. There were deaths. There's been an increase in woodlots. Cattle rustling was a big thing. You could run through the forest, you could steal someone's cows and take them across to the other side and no one would find them. That doesn't happen now. Disease is obviously reduced and landslides have reduced. Those are some of the things that the communities see right there. And as they see that, they have also realized that the forest is more valuable intact than being hacked down. Obviously, on the wildlife-human impact, the most important thing is that 100% of the crop of a farmer with 5 acres is now secure. Wildlife impact, and I know that a lot of you, and I've just read my Sunday Telegraph game change in the weekend magazine. I'm not going to go into rhino. I'm not going to go into elephant poaching in this presentation. But what I would say is that everything, all wildlife, except rhino, and this is very interesting in terms of elephant, all wildlife has not only increased, but it's more secure. We have had, and you know, you've read some of the losses and terrible losses of elephant in different countries around the world. In the Aberdares, we've had 2 poached elephant in 12 months. And on both occasions, thanks to the communities and thanks to the umbrella of the Kenya Wildlife Service, the poachers were apprehended. Now in Mount Kenya, which I'm going to talk to you about a little later, they've had more poaching, although even there the communities are already gearing up to acting as part of the security apparatus. Rhino is a different story in the Aberdares. They were poached and there is a plan to restock, but we're dealing with international criminal groups. We're dealing with a horn which is now worth on the street in China $50,000 a kilo, and we're dealing with ivory which is now $1,000 a kilo. These are massive forces that are at work, which in the subject of this talk, all I want to say is that we have created an environment which is more secure, and we will have a restocking of rhino. It is in the plan of KWS. They look after the rhino, we don't, it's their area, but I'm optimistic that we will have an environment where they can operate. We're also looking after this critically endangered an animal that is only found in the forests of Kenya, the eastern mountain bongo. We have community teams that are out there every day monitoring. They've got camera traps, and not only are we doing it in the Aberdares, but in all the mountains that we're now getting involved in, we have found pockets of bongo groups. And we're using the bongo to audiences like you to say, if you want to save that animal, then one of the most important ways to do it is to have proper management of these forests, and part of the proper management of forests is to have a fence, even though there are negative aspects about a fence. But I hope you will see that in the context of the way I'm presenting this, that in fact the fence is the creator of harmony. It's not a dividing and divisive force in community life in Kenya today. So let's just now look at the fence itself. First of all, it is an asset, but it has to be maintained. And I told you we have 100 people walking 8 kilometers each in pairs of 2 every day along that fence. It requires 50 million shillings, which I think is, that M is wrong on the pound, by the way. It should be 380,000 pounds a year to maintain this 400-kilometer fence, which encircles 2,000 square kilometers of pristine forests. And it's required annually. And we still have not secured that funding. What is the status of the ecosystem? There is continued pressure from the communities. There are elements in the communities that don't want to follow the rules. But of course, the fence means that the agencies responsible for these huge areas, and I always like to stress that over 7% of Kenya's area is either national park or national reserve. 7%. It's quite substantial. And these forest ecosystems are all part of that 7%. Yes, we are creating an island effect. But it is our policy, and within the new constitution, which was August the 10th, 2010, was voted by the people of Kenya, it is very clear in there that on issues of environment that there have to be easements, corridors for wildlife. Now, therefore, there is a national commitment, and of course it's expressed through the program of Vision 2030. And so we know some of the difficulties that we face, but we also believe that we have a broad framework in which to tackle them. And in this document that I showed you under my chair here, under the podium, these are the benefits. I'm sorry, it doesn't show because the screen is a bit small, but the benefits, the community are benefiting basically annually. They're benefiting by a value of 22 million pounds. Now, there are 40,000 families whose land abuts the fence, but they're not the only ones to benefit, because you've got obviously other communities further away from the fence. But they benefit to that amount. Regionally, now that's not the whole country, but regionally, in other words, the area from around the Aberdares, which and all the outflows of rivers from the Aberdares, which showed in one of those first slides. Regionally, the figure is $215 million. Nationally, so into the national pot, it's a smaller amount. It's the third one there. It's $36 million. And finally, the one I address to you here, the global audience, the biodiversity, the irreplaceable wildlife and other things that you love to see, and we all love to see. And by the way, Kenya Tourism now has a substantial base of people within the country that want to enjoy these things. So it's not entirely foreign driven. Um, the value is $20 million annually. And that's the evaluation that's been put on by the team of experts that did this independent survey. And I think that's very significant. And it's one I appeal to you here, particularly, because I think, you know, whereas already civil society in Kenya through Rhino Ark have expressed, they've expressed what they believe is best for these mountains. The government has begun to listen, and you will see as I go on, are contributing more and more. But there is an international responsibility which I put to you here. The global value, that one at the end, what are they? Agribusiness, which is massive, tourism, the global heritage, and of course, these mountains are carbon sinks. So there are important values. So here we have a blueprint. Here we have developed a public-private partnership. We already have Kenyan taxpayers that have supported it for 20 years and have started from a zero base. And as you see, the job was completed. And we have government that has increasingly come on board, and you will see how that is much more meaningful as I go on to Mount Kenya and the Mau. But how do we create from this blueprint? How do we create an independent mechanism that is sustainable? Now, what we have done, and we have the Attorney General's office and the Prime Minister launched the trust in May this year, the Aberdare Trust. Now, this will be a trust on which members of government will sit with Rhino Ark and with the communities, and the whole idea is to create a framework for good governance, stronger governance, and on the basis of a PPP. And therefore, again, and I come back to this, we have government, we have the Kenyan taxpayer now on board, but there is room for international participation. And you will see it's already beginning to happen as I go on in this talk. Right now, the Aberdares requires £6.15 million in an endowment fund for that trust for us to be able to run the fence independently. At the moment, Rhino Ark does it on its own with the Kenya Wildlife Service. Kenya Wildlife Service gets its money from the Treasury. That's not the way to operate, because they are not the only beneficiaries. Every single person in the country is a beneficiary, and therefore we have to create this trust and find ways to fund it. So now we go beyond the Aberdares, because we completed the Aberdares, and we've learnt an awful lot of lessons along the road. And I'm going to take you first to a small, in relative terms to the Aberdares, a small mountain that I'm sure a lot of you know, called Iburu, Mau Iburu. It sits between Lake Elementaita and Lake Naivasha. And it doesn't have any rivers flowing out of it, but it sucks in an awful lot of moisture into subterranean water. And we have started building that fence last month in Iburu. It's only a 31-mile long fence, and we're going to complete it in 18 months. And we have already secured the funding for it because of the blueprint of the Aberdares. And what has been very interesting is that the government are committing to materials. The Safaricom Foundation, which is, of course, the charitable end of the mobile phone company Safaricom, and who, of course, pioneered the first invisible transfer of money by telephone, which you still don't do here. But we can move money from one telephone to the next. And part of the funding for Safaricom Foundation comes through a thing called M-Pesa, which is how we move our money. So if you want a guy to fix your broken down washing machine, you can tell him to come on the phone and he'll be there in half an hour. And if you want to pay him, you can pay him on his phone. And in fact, a lot of people spend their Friday nights in bars in Kenya, and the money does not go to the barman. The barman takes the money on his phone. And I think a lot of people, this is sort of a new dimension, especially in a developing economy like Kenya. But it works. And it works for millions of people. Now, Safaricom have come behind us and have given us, over a 3-year program, £1.19 million for not only the fencing of the Aberdares, but so that we create community stabilization around it. And here is the forest, and it's one of 22 forest blocks which are combined together in the Mao complex. Their size combined of all those forest complexes is equivalent to Mount Kenya and the Aberdares together. So we're talking serious pieces of forest ecosystem. That's what's happening at the moment in Iburu, and that's how people get their water. Now we're going to put a major emphasis on water for the communities around Iburu, so that they're not going to say, they're going to say, well, if we protect this forest and we get water, then we have got at least the foundation for poverty, challenging the poverty situation around this first forest block. And Rhino Ark is committed policy-wise to go on into the entire Mao. We will begin to make a difference. Mount Kenya. This is the most exciting project, and we committed to both together. You probably say we're mad. Why? How do we take on these massive projects? So, you know, why do it? The thing is, if you don't give the sort of people who run in our Rhino charge cars a strong target, they lose interest. So it was my decision that we would tackle both mountains at the same time. And even though we took 20 years to complete the Aberdares, you see there, we're going to complete this one in 5. And it's going to cost nearly, well, over £7.5 million. And the funding so far, as you see, is we've got £2.3 million from both Rhino Ark and government. And I go back to that point that I feel that internationally there is a responsibility here to participate in what we're doing already in Kenya. And the important thing with Rhino Ark is that it is an indigenous conservation charity. It is not one that has started from outside the country. It lives from within. So it's got a very strong base on which to operate. I show you this picture. You see a little tiny bit of snow on the bottom right, and that was taken by a very good photographer from an aeroplane, I would add, in 2009. Nigel Pavitt was the photographer. The one on the left was taken in 1899 by the mountaineer Mackinda, and that's the Lewis Glacier as it was then and as it is now. And the question, remember at the beginning I said, is this really climate change, or is it loss of precipitation? I don't think these mountains are any colder than they've ever been, and I don't think there's been any research to evaluate that yet. It needs to be done. I think the precipitation is there. The precipitation is what is not there. If you lose forest cover, then you're not going to get convection. And it's an interesting point. So it's basically, you know, it's climate, it's not climate change, it's alteration of patterns on the ground. And it's really critical that this whole area is understood better. There's our first fence post being put in by the Minister of Finance. He's got the blue, red, and purple and white shirt. He's the guy who signs the checks. Now, that's the level of commitment we have. We can have a ceremony to say we're going to start building a fence around Mount Kenya, and the Minister of Finance wants to be there. And on the right, the guy in glasses is now the newly appointed Executive Director of Rhino Ark. I now have a stronger team, thank goodness. Christian Lambrechts, who's done a tremendous amount of work in the Mao and is one of the ones responsible for the very positive change politically that has happened within the Mao to get that land back to where it belongs, which is with the state. And so we've already completed 10 kilometers of fence in Mount Kenya. So what is the outlook for the future? We believe that our model is the one that can work. It involves local communities, but they've got to have a buy-in. They've got to see results, and we have proved that in the Aberdares results are achievable, and then you can begin to work together. So how do we do it? We believe it should be through the establishment of trusts, so that you have government, full taxpayer participation through Rhino Ark, and local communities. And those trusts need to have endowment funds and to run independent of government, even though government is on the board of them. They must have their own endowments on which, out of the income, that these fences can be managed. So what are some of the things that I hope the talk has been able to throw into the discussion ring? First of all, we have areas of immense value that are at stake. So how do we fund these? How do we fund these trusts? Now, obviously, one way long term is to get a hold of a payment system for ecosystem services, so that water and all the things that all the public require, they should contribute towards, rather than it just coming from government. Obviously, the benefits are both local and global, as I've explained. And if you look at the participation so far, we have £1.92 million committed for these new projects. But we want to send the message out that we need a third pillar in this whole momentum. And I think if it can work in Kenya, in the water towers in Kenya, it will work in other areas with similar challenges. So, you know, we need the international support. And I take you back as a final picture. There's the Lewis Glacier in the full picture, where I showed you before just the tail end of it. And that mountain we are committed to complete in 5 years. The Treasury, the Kenyan Treasury, have said that they will give us 200 million shillings, which is equivalent to about $2.5 million every year until it's finished. But there's still the endowment fund. But I think I want to leave you with this thought that, you know, here is something that is happening on a national scale, involving everyone in the country, and it is beginning to work. So I hope that those rhino that we want to have back into the Aberdares, and and often what all of you see is the most iconic um, representation of 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 what Kenya has to offer, which is very special. But there's much more to it than that, and there is actually the whole critical area of um, uh, of livelihoods. And overall, and I think I missed saying it, but overall, the environmental assessment that I showed you says that the um, the value of the Aberdares, now that it is under a sound management process, is worth 59 billion shillings annually to the Kenyan economy. So, you know, we're not just talking about we're not just talking about an effort to protect wildlife. We are. It's one of the benefits, but it's far deeper and much broader than that. So thank you very much, Alistair.